You're listening to the Second Look podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to the Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Andrew.
You're not Joe. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
We're here talking about YAHWEH RAPHA, the Lord who heals you. But first, hi, Andrew.
Hello, Dan. Again.
Glad you're here today. Andrew, I have a question for you. I want you to think back in your memory banks of your brain. Is there a memorable meal in your mind that was memorable for being bad?
Yes, Dan. There was, and my wife won't let me forget it.
Oh my! You got it.
I think this actually. No pun intended. I actually think this came up in a couples counseling session that we had at one point, and I believe it was salmon that Angela cooked, and it was so dry it was almost inedible.
Wow!
And I made a snide comment, which I cannot remember, but Angela does remember it.
Oh my!
And yeah, so I think whenever we have salmon, I'm always sure to cook it medium rare. That people don't know you can cook salmon to different temperatures, but I'm always like, I'm always trying to cook it to medium rare because of our one bad salmon experience.
That's hilarious.
Now, I will say there's a guy who walks around my neighborhood named Angelo. And he says, I'm a pretty good guy, except I'm pretty specific when it comes to my food. Like, I don't want burnt food.
Yeah.
And I tell my wife that a lot.
About Angelo or about yourself?
No, Angelo tells his wife that all the time. I don't want, I'm really harsh when it comes to burnt food. And I said, Angelo, I'm not sure my wife has ever burnt any of our food, and I've never had to worry about that, except when it comes to salmon.
Oh, that's really funny. Your wife is a good cook.
A great cook.
Right?
A great cook.
My wife does not cook.
Okay.
So we are one of the couples where I do the vast majority of the cooking. Alicia makes lunches for the girls, for school and those kinds of things as she's home with them. But I cook all the dinners unless I'm not home, or whatever.
Dan, what's the worst one that you've cooked?
Well, I've had a few biffs over the year. I was actually just going to spill the tea on one of the times that Alicia cooked dinner.
Much better.
It was, and this is something that we talk about. I mean, she's seriously probably cooked a handful of times in the entire time that we've known each other. So, going on, 18 years.
Dan, can I say something?
Yes.
If she's cooked a handful of times, that's probably 4 fingers more than I've cooked in my 15 years of being married. So.
That's amazing. But Alicia wanted to cook for me. I was in grad school. Alicia wanted to cook for me, and so she had a recipe, and she made a few key substitutions. So it was a pasta dish, and she cooked a half pound or a pound of pasta in about 14 tablespoons of water, and so it was a thing. And the recipe called for chicken stock, but she didn't have that, but she had a jar of chicken gravy for some reason. Those two are not compatible. And so it was this gummy, gluey, I'm fighting through eating this with all the gratitude in my heart. But it was one of those times that I just said, I'll take care of it. I got it. Kind of like she told me the other day, you don't need to try to do the laundry anymore.
Did you ruin something?
Oh, I did. But we're not here talking about that.
No.
We're here talking about, we need some healing in our relationships around certain things that we're doing wrong. Sorry, Alicia, about the laundry. But the whole reason for that question was Joe's opening story was about our founding pastor who said, if you really want to tick God off, complain about the food, talking about the Israelites in Exodus and those kind of things. But we're not talking about that either. We're actually talking about God, our healer. And we had a really special time on Sunday learning about healing and then also just seeking the Lord and praying for healing. And it was one of those moments that we don't have a lot of where we invited everybody to come for prayer who wanted prayer for healing. We had some people join us who drove a significant distance to be with us.
Oh, wow.
And others that invited folks to come, friends and family to come and be prayed for healing. What a special moment, wasn't it?
Oh, one of my favorite parts of a Sunday morning is being able to pray for people. So like one of my personal favorite parts. And just when you get to pray for people and they come up for prayer, it's actually an act of faith to get out of your seat.
Yes.
Right? And come up front and say, Lord, I need you.
Yeah.
And I preached a bunch of weeks ago about the Lord who provides. And one of the points was, right, that the Lord provides in response to our faith.
Yeah.
And when we take a step of faith, which means we're coming up because we're saying, like, I need you, Lord, seriously, he does respond. And we know he doesn't respond the exact way we want or the exact timing all the time, but he does respond.
Well, we talked about faith when we were talking about the Lord, our righteousness, and about how we're saved by grace through faith, right? Mm-hmm. Not saved by faith, but there's a faith component to all of this. And we often talk about having faith in Jesus. Is faith for healing the same in your mind? Is it different in your mind? How does faith play into the healing process?
Yeah, so faith, sometimes we think of faith as just belief. Like, I believe something is true, so I've put my faith in Jesus Christ, but that's not a biblical definition of faith. Faith is actually, there's actually no word for believe in Greek. It's always the word faithing. So,
interesting.
So it's always kind of like this active thing that we think is mentally assenting to something. Like, I believe this is true, right? I believe the Eagles could win the Super Bowl this year, right? Which usually that leads to
There's a
disappointment.
lot of faith in the Philadelphia community around that very topic.
Yes.
Most falls.
Yeah, most falls, right? But faith is always leads to action. So Dallas Willard says, like, you can say you believe something, but the things you do reveal what you actually believe. And when we put our faith in Jesus as the leader of our life, what we're saying is, Lord, the title of my life is signed over to you. So what you tell me to do, that's what I want to do. And that's where faith eventually leads up to, right? Where we're just obedient and trust.
So what does that mean that faith always leads to action?
Yeah, so if you believe something is true, like I sat down in this chair because I believed that it would hold me.
Yeah.
Right? So when you act in faith, right, you'll do things because you believe that God is with you, that God is your provider, that he is for you, not against you, right? So we can take steps out to say, hey, I'm going to give because I believe that God is actually my provider.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? I'm going to share about Jesus with someone because I believe that they need that more than they need whatever else they have right now. Right? I'm like, when it comes to my kids, right? I'm going to tell myself, right, that I don't need to be anxious, even though it seems like they're not going towards Christ, because I believe Christ is in control. And so it goes to every aspect of our life. And so we put into action what we believe.
So when it comes to taking a step of faith and asking for prayer for healing, is our faith an expectation that God's going to heal, that he's going to answer the prayer? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I've gone through a journey in my life in talking about healing and thinking about healing. And there is definitely a time in my life where, yes, I believed in healing. Yes, I wanted to pray for healing, but I'm not sure I always expected God to do it, even though I've seen real things happen. So my wife, Angela, her mom was healed of breast cancer, right, without surgery. And there's a revival, and she got prayed for, and she had breast cancer according to the doctor, and then she went back and she didn't. I've seen someone whose pinky was crooked, and then they got prayed for at a youth convention, and then they could pull it straight. Right? So I've seen actual healing, but believing that God could heal me or heal through me was something that I was like, sure, I'll say it in word, but I'm not sure I actually believe it in faith. And I think things changed when I realized, hey, one of the things that should always follow up after praying for healing is asking someone if they got healed or if God moved. Because what I'm doing is expecting God to do something instead of before I was like, well, I hope that happened and that kind of thing, right?
Right, sure.
But when you ask afterwards, it's kind of like, I really want to know if God healed because I asked. And I think through the journey of my life, it's been growing more and more to say, yep, I believe God could do this. Yes, I believe God could do this. Do I see it happen every time I pray? No, but I do believe that he can and he does.
And there have been a number of times, even recently, where you have prayed that God would heal people, and it's happened.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember Joe and I prayed for someone's shoulder a couple of months ago, and we just prayed, and they didn't say anything afterwards, but then I just followed up, and they're like, hey, by the way, God healed, right? And then I asked them like 3 weeks ago, I'm like, hey, how's your shoulder? And they're like, yep, it's still healed. And I'm like, okay, good Lord.
Yeah.
But then got to pray for someone's back to be healed a couple of weeks ago and prayed, just like thought maybe God will do something. And they texted me the next day and like, hey, the back's healed. And I followed up with them again another week later, like, how's your back? Oh, yep, it's still good. And I'm like, okay, Lord, this is a real thing. And so you can still tell like I'm still growing in my faith and believing God will heal. But God is doing work here, right?
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear what what stories from this past Sunday and what God will do. And I find that the normal is not usually immediate, at least in my own experience, although there's some people that is their experience. But just like Trevor's story, right? In Trevor's story, he thought something might have happened, but he didn't find out till a month later.
Yeah, well, so can we just talk about Trevor's story a little bit? Because I had a side conversation with someone someone on our worship team who watched that video 3 times of Trevor having this mass on his kidney, diagnosed as cancer, went in for surgery, the mass was there, and yet somehow it was not cancerous. But 2 guys that he worked with had the same cancer. And so Denny, our drummer, he texted me and he goes, is anyone concerned at the amount of cancer around this guy, around Trevor? And I was able to explain to him, like, yeah, where Trevor previously worked, they think that they worked around some chemicals that may have been or are carcinogenic. And so the cancer, the exact cancer that a minimum of these 3 guys had that worked around these materials, all indications were Trevor was one, and this is like a situation that maybe they should have been protected from or whatever. Trevor had cancer. It was diagnosed, he had a mass. When they went in to remove that mass, it certainly should have been cancerous based on the diagnosis, based on these other guys that had the exact same surgery. And yet, Trevor, after feeling what he felt and being prayed for and the Lord touching him, somehow the cancerous cells were gone.
Yeah.
The mass was still there.
Yeah.
But the cancer was gone. Like, that's a miracle. In my mind, that is an absolute miracle that God could touch him in that way. Andrew, have you experienced healing in your body?
Funny enough, Dan, I actually asked one of our elders to pray over me because I was having some issues with my shoulder. And I feel like, Dan, that was one of the first times that I've ever asked someone to pray over me for healing. And I had this realization, like, do I believe that God is my healer?
Yeah.
Like, I believe that God can heal other people, but I'm not sure that I've actually, at least for physical healing, right, asked him to be my physical healer. Now, maybe when I get the flu or when I'm sick, and if you ask my wife, she'll tell you, like, I'm as bad or worse than our kids when I get sick. So maybe I've asked the Lord to heal me then. But I'm not sure I've ever experienced it in my own body, but even being prayed over was another moment for my faith to grow, to say, like, Lord, you're actually my healer as well. Like, not just you can use me and you don't always use me, and he doesn't always use everybody to do the same thing over and over again. But man, my faith was grown on Sunday to just believe, like, yeah, God can be my healer. And was my shoulder healed at that exact moment? No. It feels a lot better today.
Yeah.
Is that time? Is that the
Right,
Lord?
right.
Right? Like, don't want to over spiritualize it. But so I would say maybe some emotional healing for sure. But physical healing, I'm not sure. Dan, how about you?
I have experienced that. My sister a couple years ago went into the hospital with some acute pain. They found pancreatic cancer. They literally measured this mass, however many centimeters it was, like to the 10th of a centimeter. They transferred her to the oncology department of another hospital in the city, close to where they were, and they said, I mean, it was pretty sudden. They said, you have pancreatic cancer, and they were developing a treatment plan. Now, meanwhile, my parents' church, our church, we were praying. We prayed in a pre-service meeting here with our worship and tech teams. And as they transferred her, they did another scan to just pinpoint exactly where it was. And they couldn't find the mass. Wow. I mean, this is something they measured to a 10th of a centimeter that they couldn't find afterwards. My mom fell backwards off of a deck. When I was a kid, we had a pool. We had a deck. It wasn't quite finished yet. Didn't have a railing. Her folding chair, the back leg was off, and she fell backwards off of this deck, probably 5 feet up. Was in traction, was in physical therapy, all kinds of stuff. Sunday night service at our church, went up to be prayed for healing, was anointed with oil, felt tingling throughout her body, was in a neck brace, was able to take the neck brace off and never had another issue.
Wow.
I had hands, I had a lot of warts on my hands when I was a kid for a long time, like a significant amount of time, and never prayed, actually. And it finally, I needed treatment, needed to get them like, get them burned or like frozen off. And so my mom made the appointment and we prayed. And the next day, now this was months or a year or however long it was, the next day I didn't have the next day, Andrew, woke up,
Dan,
didn't have a single wart on my hand.
Dan.
And it's significant when that happens to you. Now, I will say, I probably should pray for healing more in my own life. If I really believe that God wants to heal. Like, full disclosure, I'm lactose intolerant. I've been lactose intolerant for 20 years.
Yeah.
In the early days of our church, before we had actually launched, our leadership team had a retreat, and there were 2 others on our team who were lactose intolerant. I wasn't able to be there that day for that retreat. Those 2, Jonathan Capisi, Kim Ortiz, they were prayed over, and they were healed instantly of lactose intolerant. I wasn't there, and I'm still bitter.
Wow, Dan, you're 20 years late to the party, man.
But Saturday night at our ice cream social, I was talking to Paul and Cindy Kaloya, and they said, we pray for you all the time that God would heal you of that.
Wow.
Like, as Alicia and I are like least likely person to host the ice cream social, right? Being lactose intolerant. and yet this couple who have prayed for and received healing are praying for me. For a simple, silly, I mean, it's silly, it's an inconvenience, but they said for the amount of travel that you do and mission trips and all those kinds of things, like, we want God to heal you. And, like, I want to receive healing for that.
Yeah,
right?
Dan, maybe on the next second look, you can drink a glass of milk.
Well, but here's the reality. Like, I actually wasn't prayed for on Sunday for that. I had to play keys, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm being like, I don't know that I've really seriously asked the Lord for that. But I want to just pivot in our last minute or two here and ask you how, like, maybe the reason why I don't seriously pray for healing for that is because I look at others who are dealing with things like cancer and injuries, and I'm like, God, heal them.
Yes.
I don't, like, this is an inconvenience. Andrew, I know we can't answer why, but can we just talk about, like, how God heals some people sometimes and others he doesn't right away or at the time?
Yeah. So one thing I've come to believe, based on some experiences I've had, is that God always answers yes for healing for those who are followers of Jesus. And so have friends who have cancer, it's terminal cancer. And I've prayed over and over again for healing. And I believe God's going to answer that. But if you're a follower of Jesus, we're promised that one day, right, when we meet Jesus, when our bodies are resurrected, there's no more pain.
Yeah.
No more sorrow, no more sickness, right? Our bodies are made whole and new. And part of our issue is that we want God's timing to be different, but he actually knows what's best. And so actually, when right, I pray for someone, they don't get healed and they're a follower of Jesus, I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to keep praying because I believe your timing is best. And sometime God's timing is a day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, 20 years later, right? But other times it's when they meet Jesus. And I have a close friend who he's losing his battle with cancer. And again, prayed over him multiple times, and like, he's a man of faith and he loves Jesus. And I believe that God's going to answer the prayer for healing, but it may not be on this side of eternity. And so it gives me hope that God is going to heal because he is a healer, but we don't always get to choose the timing.
Did you pray over the salmon that day?
You know what? I've forgotten God's healed the memory of the salmon in my mind. So we're good there.
Well, this has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.